She had memorized the sound of his footsteps before she ever learned his name. 3 years working the books for Meridian Import and Export, a company that, on paper, moved Italian ceramics and specialty olive oil through the port of Miami. And Celia Pruett had developed a particular talent for disappearing, not literally. She was too large a woman to vanish from any room, though God knew she had tried. But she had mastered the art of becoming furniture, of keeping her eyes on the spreadsheets, her cardigan pulled tight around her shoulders, even in the Miami heat. Her presence so unremarkable that the men in their tailored suits walked past her desk without a second glance. That was the goal. That had always been the goal. She wasn't naive. You didn't work 3 years for Aldrich Voss and remain naive. The ceramics were sometimes ceramics. The olive oil was sometimes olive oil, and the other shipments, the ones that moved through the secondary manifest, she was never technically supposed to access, but had. Because she was good at her job, and good at her job meant understanding the full picture. Those were something else entirely. She knew what Meridian was. She knew what Aldrich Voss was. She just needed the paycheck, and she was very, very good at not being noticed. Aldrich Voss controlled the southeastern coast the way weather controlled the sea, completely and without apology. He was 51 years old, silver-haired at the temples, and possessed of a stillness that most men spent their entire lives trying to fake. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. In 12 years building his operation from a salvage yard in Hialeah to the most feared criminal network between Jacksonville and Key West, Aldrich Voss had killed exactly as many people as necessary, and not one more. That economy of violence was, his lieutenants whispered, what made him truly dangerous. A man who killed for pleasure was predictable. A man who killed only when required could not be anticipated. Celia had seen him in the office perhaps a dozen times. He moved through the space like the building had been designed around him, which, given that he owned it, was probably true. On the 3 occasions he had passed her desk, he had not looked at her. She had told herself this was ideal. She had told herself this so many times it had almost become true. On the Tuesday in early November, when everything came apart, Celia was working late. This was not unusual. The quarterly reconciliation was due Friday, and Marcus, her supervisor, had the organizational skills of a golden retriever and roughly the same attention to detail, which meant that the actual work fell to her. The office had emptied by 7. By 9, the only light burning in the entire 14th floor of the Meridian building was the lamp on her desk, and Celia had her shoes off and her reading glasses on and a lukewarm coffee going cold at her elbow. She heard them before she saw them. Voices, low and urgent, coming from the stairwell. The elevator in this building announced itself with a distinctive chime. Whoever was coming up was not taking the elevator. Celia did not think. She turned off her lamp. The darkness was immediate and total. She pressed herself back into her chair, pulling her feet up from the floor, and went completely still. She had learned this reflex in her first week at Meridian, the same way a small animal learns the freeze response near a road. Not from instruction, but from instinct, and the sudden biological understanding that sometimes the best thing you can be is nothing at all. The stairwell door opened. There were 3 of them. She could tell by the cadence of footsteps, the particular distribution of weight across the old hardwood. The office was dark, but the Miami skyline poured blue-white light through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and as her eyes adjusted, she could make out shapes. 2 of the men were large, the kind of large that suggested they were paid specifically for it. The 3rd was smaller, quicker, and moved to Marcus's office with the certainty of someone who had been here before. They were not supposed to be here. Whatever they were here for, it was not authorized. Celia knew this because she had the quarterly financial picture in her head the way a musician holds a score, every note, every measure, and she knew, with the calm precision that had always been both her greatest asset and her deepest loneliness, Exactly which files Marcus kept in the third drawer of his filing cabinet, and exactly why someone might want them. She should have stayed still. She should have let them take what they came for and leave, and then called in sick tomorrow, and the day after, and found a new position somewhere, far from the import business. What she actually did was reach, very quietly, for her phone. She did not call the police. She called the number she had found 18 months ago when she had been cross-referencing emergency contacts in the employee files, a number labeled only AV, that she had memorized the way she memorized everything important, without intending to, without wanting to. It rang twice. Who is this? Not a question, a demand, low and even, issued by someone who was accustomed to people explaining themselves immediately. She kept her voice to the barest thread of sound. This is Celia Pruitt. I'm the senior accountant on the 14th floor. There are 3 men in the office right now who are not supposed to be here, and I believe they are removing documents from Marcus Ellery's files. I don't know who they work for. I can describe them if that's useful. A silence. Then, don't move. The line went dead. She had expected, perhaps, that he would send someone. What she had not expected was that she would hear his voice again in 11 minutes. Not through the phone, but through the stairwell door, which opened with a controlled precision that was entirely different from the way it had opened the first time. She recognized him by his stillness, even in the dark. Aldrich Voss stood in the doorway of his own office building and surveyed the space with the expression of a man taking inventory. Behind him were 2 others. They moved without being told. What happened next was brief and not particularly loud. There was a crash from Marcus's office, a short struggle, and then quiet. The kind of quiet that settled over a room after a decision had been made. She was still in her chair, still with her feet tucked up, and her reading glasses on her head, and her cold coffee at her elbow. She realized distantly that she was still holding her phone. He found her in the dark without difficulty, as though the dark were simply a different kind of light that he happened to see better in. He stopped in front of her desk. She looked up. Celia Pruitt, he said. Mr. Voss. He looked at her for a long moment. She could not read his expression. She had never been able to read his expression, which was somewhat remarkable given that she could read almost everything else. You called me directly. Yes, that number is not in any file you should have access to. No, she agreed. It isn't. How long have you had it? 18 months. Something shifted in his face, not softened exactly. More like a door that had been locked for a very long time had just been tested, and whoever tested it had found the right key without knowing they were doing it. Go home, Miss Pruitt, he said. Don't come in tomorrow. She put her shoes on. She gathered her bag. She was halfway to the elevator when his voice came again, quiet enough that she wasn't certain she was meant to hear it. The blue coat, he said. You wear it on Mondays. She did not turn around. She pressed the elevator button and kept her face forward and told herself that her heart was pounding because of the men in Marcus's office and not because of anything else. She did not entirely believe herself. She went home to her apartment in Coral Gables, which was small and organized with the same meticulous precision she applied to everything. And she sat on her couch with her cat, a bad-tempered orange tabby named Biscuit, and she had a glass of wine, and she thought very carefully about what to do next. The smart thing, the safe thing, was to quit. Send a polite email in the morning, cite personal reasons, be out of the Meridian building before noon, and out of Miami by the end of the month. She had savings. She had marketable skills. She had a professional reputation that had nothing to do with the secondary manifest she was technically not supposed to know existed. She had told herself this before, in the first month and the 6th, and after the incident 14 months ago involving a shipping container from Cartagena that had appeared in the books as decorative stone tile. She had told herself to leave, and she had stayed, and she had stopped asking herself why she stayed. because she did not like the honest answer. She went to sleep with biscuit on her feet, and her mind running through the reconciliation spreadsheet and the face of Aldrich Voss in the dark, and she told herself that tomorrow she would decide. Tomorrow she would figure it out. She had 3 days before the decision was made for her. It was Friday when they took her. She had come back to the office, because of course she had. The reconciliation was due, and there was no one else who could finish it, and she was, at her core, someone who finished what she started. The building had felt normal. The day had felt normal. She had her coffee and her glasses and her spreadsheet, and she was 40 minutes from finishing when 2 men she had never seen before walked out of the elevator. They did not look at the receptionist. They walked directly to her desk. The larger of the two said, "Mr. Harmon wants to speak with you." Celia had heard the name Harmon Delacroix, perhaps 4 times in 3 years. Always spoken carefully. Always accompanied by a particular quality of stillness in whoever said it. The stillness of someone who understood that some names were weather fronts. Harmon Delacroix controlled the Gulf operations out of New Orleans. He and Voss had what Celia understood from context and the careful reading of financial arrangements to be an arrangement built on mutual deterrence rather than trust. "I'm not finished with my report," she said. The man's expression did not change. It wasn't a request. They took her phone at the elevator. They put her in the back of a black SUV with tinted windows that smelled of leather and something chemical she chose not to think about, and they drove for 40 minutes. She used the time to memorize details: the direction of the sun, the sound of the highway, 2 exits she could identify by their particular rumble strips. She catalogued what she knew about Harmon Delacroix from the financial arrangements she had processed. A man who leveraged debt, who used documentation as a weapon, who understood that the real power was not in the shipment but in the paper trail. He wanted her because of the books. That was the only reason she mattered. She told herself this clearly and without sentiment, because sentiment had no practical application in the back of a black SUV. The building they brought her to was industrial. Somewhere in what her directional calculations suggested was northwest Miami-Dade, a processing facility, or what had been one, the kind of building that held history in its bones, oil and rust, and the particular smell of a space where physical labor had been replaced by something less visible and considerably more profitable. Harmon Delacroix was not what she expected. He was 60, thin and elegant in a pale linen suit, and he had the eyes of a man who thought generosity and weakness were synonyms. "Miss Pruitt," he said, pouring himself a drink with the leisure of someone who controlled the schedule entirely, "you have access to Aldrich Voss's financial infrastructure that most of his own people don't have." "I need that access. I'm an accountant," she said. "You're the best accountant he has, which means you know where everything is." He set down his glass. "I want the offshore routing, the secondary accounts, the names behind the Cayman structures. I don't have that information. I think you do." She held his gaze. "I'm a bookkeeper. I reconcile invoices and prepare quarterly reports. Whatever you think I have access to, you're incorrect." He smiled, and it was the worst kind of smile, patient and certain and slightly sad, the way a surgeon is sad before an incision. "Give us a few hours with her," he said to the men behind her. "She'll remember." She did not let herself think about what that meant. She filed it away and kept her breathing even and looked for the exits. There were 2 doors and 4 men, and her hands were not tied, which was either an oversight or a test. She decided it was an oversight and stored that away also. They put her in a room that had once been a foreman's office. There was a chair and a desk, and a window painted over with white, and her heels were loud on the concrete floor. One of the men, younger than the others, heavy through the shoulders, with the particular boredom of someone used to waiting, remained with her. She had approximately 20 minutes before whoever Delacroix had sent for arrived. She could work with 20 minutes. She was not a woman who had ever hit anyone. She was a woman who balanced spreadsheets and had strong opinions about the Oxford comma, and sometimes cried at dog food commercials. But she was also a woman who had spent 3 years quietly observing people who operated in violence, the way other people operated in commerce, and she had paid attention, and she had noted, without ever intending to apply the knowledge, the particular things that happened when a large man was not expecting any resistance from a soft woman in a cardigan. The fire suppression panel was on the wall to her left. It was old, older than the renovation, installed before the building changed hands, and she could see from where she sat that the manual pull station had not been updated when everything else was. It was the kind of oversight that only someone who looked at the details would notice. She knocked over her chair. It was a small, stupid accident. She reached for it, apologizing, and the guard moved toward her reflexively. The instinct to help or to control, it didn't matter which, and she caught the pull station on her way to the floor. The alarm was not subtle. In the chaos of the sprinklers and the shouting, she moved through the door and down the hallway the way water moves through a crack. Not dramatically, not at speed, but with the persistence of something that has identified the path of least resistance and committed to it entirely. She found a loading dock. She found a door. The Miami evening hit her like a wall, heat and exhaust and the distant salt of the bay, and she ran. She was not a runner. She was a woman with flat arches and good organizational skills, and running was something she had avoided since 8th grade gym class. But she ran, down the service road behind the facility, past a chain-link fence and through a gap that took the sleeve of her blouse and most of her dignity. And then she was on a surface street she recognized from the exit sounds. Flagler, somewhere in Hialeah, and there was a gas station 2 blocks north with the lights on. And she walked toward it with her blouse torn and her hair coming down and the sprinkler water still dripping from her hair. She asked the man behind the counter if she could use the phone. She called AV. "It's Celia Pruitt," she said when it picked up on the first ring. "I'm at a gas station on Flagler and 68th in Hialeah. Harmon Delacroix's people had me. I got out on my own. I need—" She stopped. She was surprised to find that her voice had done something she had not given it permission to do. She pressed the heel of her hand against her sternum. "I need someone to come." The silence on the line was not long, but it had a quality to it, dense and particular, like the moment before a pressure system breaks. "Don't move," said Aldrich Voss, and then, very quietly, almost too quietly to hear, "Are you hurt?" She looked at her wrist, which was bleeding from the fence, at her shoes, which had not been designed for running across industrial parking lots, at the reflection in the gas station window, a large, disheveled woman with bad hair and a torn blouse and streaked mascara, holding a stranger's phone in a fluorescent-lit convenience store at 9 in the evening. "I'm fine," she said. She heard something cross his voice that she could not name. "I'll be there in 12 minutes. He was there in 8. The car came fast and stopped clean, and Aldrich Voss stepped out before it had fully settled, crossing the distance between the car and the gas station door with the stride of a man who has decided something and is in the process of executing it. He stopped in front of her. He looked at her, the wrist, the blouse, the shoes, and something happened in his face that she had not seen before. He was not still. For the first time in 3 years of careful observation, Aldrich Voss was not still. His jaw was locked, and his hands, hanging at his sides, had closed into something that was not quite fists, but was moving in that direction, and his eyes on her wrist had a quality that she recognized from the financial documents, the ones about Cartagena and the arrangements with certain parties in Bogotá, the quality of a man calculating the cost of a decision that had already been made. "The cut isn't deep," she said. "I know. I'm all right. I just needed a pickup." Celia, the way he said her name, not Miss Pruitt, not the last name and the title he had used in the dark office 3 days ago, stopped her entirely. Let me look at you. She let him. She stood on the cracked sidewalk outside a gas station in Hialeah, and Aldrich Voss, who was known along the eastern seaboard as a man who had never needed anything from anyone, took her wrist in both hands with a care that seemed at odds with everything she understood about him, and examined the cut with the focused attention he typically applied to profit projections. I pulled the fire suppression panel, she told him, because she needed to be doing something, and talking was something. The alarm gave me enough confusion to get to the loading dock. The gap in the fence was manageable. I calculated the street from the highway sounds on the drive in. I knew I was in Hialeah, I just needed a landmark. He was still looking at the cut. You calculated the street from highway sounds. I pay attention to things. I've noticed. She looked at him. He was looking at her wrist, and there was something in the careful way he held it. In the space between his hands and her skin, in the breath he was taking, that made her understand. With the same precision she understood balance sheets and secondary manifests and the routing of offshore accounts, that this was not the grip of a man who considered her an employee. "The blue coat," she said. "You know I wear it on Mondays." He raised his eyes then, and for a moment they were just two people outside a gas station while Miami moved around them, and all the things that made Aldrich Voss what he was, and all the things that made Celia Pruitt what she was, too large and too invisible and too smart for rooms that didn't want her in them, were simply facts about two people standing close enough to share air. "I've been noticing you for 2 years," he said. "You've been choosing not to be noticed. It seemed safer." "It was." He released her wrist. He did not step back. "It won't be anymore." What happened to Harmon Delacroix in the weeks that followed was the kind of thing that was understood without being stated among the people who moved through Aldrich Voss's world. The Gulf operation fell apart with the particular efficiency of a financial structure being unwound from the inside. Accounts frozen, arrangements exposed, the careful documentation that Delacroix had used as leverage, repurposed with a precision that suggested someone very good with numbers had been involved. The men who had taken Celia from the Meridian building did not have a good autumn. Delacroix himself retired. To somewhere inland, it was said, somewhere far from the coast and the shipping lanes and the particular economy of Miami that he had spent 30 years trying to control. Celia finished the quarterly reconciliation. She filed it on Monday and sent it to Marcus, who thanked her with an email full of enthusiastic punctuation and no apparent awareness that anything had happened, which was, she reflected, entirely consistent with his general professional presence. She was packing up her desk at the end of the day when she found the envelope. It was plain white, unmarked except for her name in handwriting she recognized, precise and slightly forward-leaning, the handwriting of a man who made decisions quickly and wrote them down immediately so they wouldn't be softened by time. Inside was a single card. On it, in the same hand, there's a position available. Senior financial analyst. The office has a window and is not adjacent to Marcus. The salary has been adjusted to reflect what you are actually worth, rather than what you accepted in 2021, because you were trying not to draw attention to yourself. The decision is yours. Below it, a second line, slightly different in pressure, added after. She could tell, by the way the ink sat, Miskit is welcome. We have mice. She stood at her desk for a long moment with the card in her hand. Outside, the Miami skyline had gone golden, and the bay was catching the last of the light. And somewhere 14 floors down, she knew without looking, there was a car idling at the curb. She picked up her bag. She picked up the small succulent she kept on the corner of her desk, the one she had brought from her apartment the first week because she'd read that plants made workspaces feel inhabited, feel human, feel like places where a person could matter. She took the elevator down. He was leaning against the car with his jacket open and his arms crossed, watching the lobby doors with the patience of a man who was accustomed to waiting, but had decided, apparently, that this particular waiting was acceptable. When she pushed through the doors, something crossed his face, quick and ungoverned, the way a reaction moves through a man who has spent a long time governing everything. "The position," she said. "What are the hours? The dental? Comprehensive, and—" She stopped. She looked at him. He was looking back at her with an expression she was only now beginning to understand how to read. Not closed, not still, but waiting. The way a man waits when he understands that the next word belongs to someone else, and he has the patience to let her say it. "The position," she said. "I'll take it." The smile that crossed his face was small and contained, but it reached his eyes, and she understood, with the clarity she applied to everything that mattered, that she was not the only one who had been hiding, that on the other side of all that stillness and all that controlled, careful power was a man who had noticed a woman in a blue coat on Mondays and had chosen, for 2 years, to let her believe she was invisible. He opened the car door. She got in. Biscuit, she decided, would adjust. He always did.